Racial wealth gap between white American families and black American families is, well, it's more of a chasm than a gap.
We have a real wealth crisis in the United States of America. The wealth gap continues to spiral larger and larger in this country, while you see a lot more people being trapped, unable to create wealth, which is economic security, which can be passed on to generation.
In 2019, the median household wealth for white families was nearly $190,000, almost 8 times higher than that of black households.
If we don't do anything, it will be many generations, literally 100, 200 years before you begin to see that racial wealth gap close.
There's a few ideas and potential policies meant to combat this very problem. One of them is baby bonds. Under this kind of policy, the US government would deposit money into interest-bearing accounts for every newborn baby.
It should actually be called baby trust. More accurately, baby bonds has a nice consonance to it.
A baby bonds program could cost the US government anywhere between $60 billion and $80 billion.
This is an idea to help more Americans have pathways to wealth.
Conservative policy experts argue that baby bonds could reduce incentives to save or to pursue education.
It is not a silver bullet. It does not solve the racial wealth gap. And I suppose you really have to believe in the power of this money to change people's life trajectories at age 18.
According to an analysis from investment firm Morningstar, Senator Cory Booker's baby bonds proposal, the American Opportunity Accounts Act, could reduce the racial wealth gap between white and black households by 40% if passed.
As kids reach age 18, get access to this money, they'll have more funds to help them plan for their future. But will it actually do that? And to what extent will it do it?
Here's how baby bonds work. Baby bonds aren't a new idea. Baby bonds came up in 1935 when FDR was in the White House, battling the Great Depression. Back then, baby bonds looked more like traditional savings bonds. The concept was brought back into the conversation in a serious way by economists William Darity and Derek Hamilton in 2010. Senator Cory Booker's American Opportunity Accounts Act is much different. He first introduced it in 2019 while running for the Democratic presidential nomination. Then the bill was reintroduced with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley.
I support this idea called baby bonds, which is really a bill that looks to say that everybody in this country, if you're born as a birthright in America, you have an interest-bearing savings account with $1,000 in that savings account, every child. And depending on the wealth of your family, every child will get a deposit annually up to 18 into that account, upwards of $2,000 for the lowest income children.
When the child turns 18, depending on their family's income, they could have nearly $50,000. Or if the child comes from a very well-off family, they'd end up with just over $1,600 by the age 18. Since they wouldn't be getting any annual payments.
That lowest income kids could have upwards of $50,000 of wealth by the time that they're 18 to invest in things that we know create wealth. Going to college, starting a business, buying a home.
So baby bonds don't exactly work like the traditional bond traded in the marketplace.
It's not something that you can purchase. It gets called a bond because the proposal invests it into treasury bonds. So there is a bond aspect to it right now.
The U.S. Treasury Department would manage the accounts, aiming for an annual rate of 3%.
It's a universal, federally funded trust fund for every newborn baby in the United States. You get your social security number and then you get a trust fund. And you can't use that money until you become a young adult. And it can grow in the meantime on your behalf, but you'll know as you're growing up that you have this thing that you're going to come into in the future. So the wealthiest parents, the kids born into the wealthiest households would get the least, but everybody would get something.
401k, 529, similar idea, right? You put it in and at some point you're going to hit some life milestone where you need this money and you use this money for that.
Under the proposed American Opportunities Accounts Act, baby bond recipients can only use the funds for wealth-building activities. That includes buying a home, continuing education, or starting a business.
There's various different ways I think that it can kind of drive long-term wealth. It won't necessarily solve wealth at age 18, I think, right? There's limited things that you can do to grow your wealth at age 18, but as that generation ages, they then have more resources to help grow their long-term wealth.
So there's a few ways this kind of policy could work. It could be based on income, where every year, depending on the family's reported income based on their tax returns, a contribution is made to the baby's account.
Like if your parents got rich, you would get less. So ultimately, people whose parents stayed low income their whole childhood would end up getting the full amount. But for others, it would vary.
This is how the policy works under the proposal from Senator Booker.
And when we saw that Senator Booker had introduced a bill, that particular program design hadn't been modeled.
Morningstar's model found an income-based baby bonds program could reduce the racial wealth gap between white and black households by 40%.
And so I'm pretty convinced that this is the basic approach you'd want to take. I think there's a lot of questions around the edges. How much the contributions be? How quickly should they decline as people are, as incomes move above the poverty line?
In January 2021, Booker and Presley urged President Joe Biden to include the American Opportunity Accounts Act into the next economic recovery package. But that hasn't happened.
So for me, it's a very exciting way that we in America, through a fraction of what we already do to create wealth for the wealthiest, just about 10% of that could be used in a program like this that would help to create wealth amongst the lowest income children in America. And the great thing about this is wealth creates wealth. In other words, it's not a zero-sum game that you get some wealth and you lose some wealth. It actually will create more opportunity for more people in this country.
Then there's a whole other way this policy could work. Giving babies one lump sum at birth based on the family's wealth.
Naomi did a research paper that looked at a wealth-based program, that she did sort of a one-time contribution as opposed to annual contributions.
According to Zodi's research, young black adults had a median net worth of about $2,900. Young white adults had a median net worth of $46,000. That's 16 times more. She found that with a baby bonds program, the median white young adult would have more than $79,000, while the median black young adult would have over $57,000.
The median white is still better off. It's just that the median black is more better off because you find more black people among the lower end of the wealth distribution. But the reason all of that is happening is simply because households at the bottom of the wealth distribution get the most, regardless of their race. And those households at the top of the wealth distribution just get a little bit, but everybody's better off.
A wealth-based baby bonds policy could help close the racial wealth gap, but getting access to that data isn't really possible right now.
Because we can do income now, we should do it. And over time, we can convert it to being based on wealth as we develop those records.
A baby bonds program could cost the U.S. government anywhere between $60 billion and $80 billion.
We've done some back of the envelope stuff, and we think it's certainly somewhere in the order of tens of billions a year, not like trillions.
$80 billion is really not that much money for the federal government. It's a little bit more than food stamps.
How do you think baby bonds can be funded?
I'm either suggesting we pay for it by getting rid of some of the tax deductions that accrue disproportionately to the wealthy, or be willing to make the investment, understanding that it's something that will help get returns on that investment over the long term.
This is not cheap, but it's not that expensive either. Should society spend money on this? It's a question of values and preferences.
Baby bonds cannot fix the racial wealth gap alone.
This is one of the more powerful ways of going towards closing that racial wealth gap. But clearly, we have a lot more work to do in America.
Baby bonds is just like a good program, and we should have it. And there's also these other pieces of reparations that would be necessary, like just culturally coming together and dealing with the violence and the economic violence and physical violence of segregation and slavery, and of contemporary segregation in education and housing. Together, that truth and reconciliation is vital to a reparations program, and there should be remuneration, financial remuneration attached to that initiative too. So I think that it's absolutely necessary regardless of baby bonds.
Some states are introducing similar baby bonds-like programs focused on college savings.
These smaller scale demonstrations can serve as proof of concept and help to get the larger federal bill passed.
Progressive economic programs like baby bonds were a long shot during the Trump administration, but under Biden and with a Democrat-controlled House and Senate, there may be a chance.
We're not in a very bipartisan moment for anything, so I wouldn't say I'm wildly optimistic in the short term, but maybe in the medium term.
So I have a lot of hope that this could be something that can take the interest of Republican colleagues of mine who I've talked about, who are interested in wealth building ideas. And I'm hoping this could be something that eventually can get to bipartisan support.
I don't think it'll be this year. It becomes far more possible, within the next 5 years. And I like to think of it this way. The fact that we live in a democracy means that we can do whatever we want. And that's the whole point. Hopefully that democracy is not lost on us. So as more and more people come to understand what it's about and how feasible it would be, that's really the thing that determines whether or not we do it.